I've ever watched, and almost as good as the Patriots yesterday, almost. And the Red Sox ended again, great year, 500. But obviously we're thrilled that all of you could start your week here with the New England Council. I want to begin by thanking the sponsor of this morning's breakfast, Amica, for their generosity. In particular, I want to acknowledge Jim Loring, who's Chief Financial Officer, Kristen Abdel-Aziz, Director of Corporate Communications, who will introduce our guests in just a few moments. Many of you know that Amica is a longtime member of the New England Council, and of course, a tremendous corporate citizen here in Rhode Island, and we're truly grateful for their ongoing support for the New England Council. As many of you know, Amica is now the corporate sponsor of the Boston Celtics, which is extraordinary, and to be associated with the Boston Celtics is quite an accomplishment, and it will truly increase the profile of Amica. I'd also like to just acknowledge the presence of David Cicilline. I think most of you are here. I think many of you are here to see David, and we're thrilled to have him. As you know, he's running the Rhode Island Foundation and doing a great job, but he is missed in the United States Congress, and I know the Senator would agree, but a man of monumental accomplishments in Congress, and also just so well respected on both sides of the aisle, and glad to see he is here, back in his home state, and doing a great job. So I want to also just take a moment to thank all of you for joining us in our 2024 annual celebration in Boston. And we had, some extraordinary recipients of New England of the Year, but, we are one of the smallest business organizations in New England. We always say we fight above our weight. And our dinner was an indication of how well respected we are when we have 1,700 people in a room that we're told is the largest business gathering in all of New England annually, and we seem to do it each and every year. And it's because of our members who step up to the plate to say, this is the voice of New England, and we want to be part of their extraordinary annual celebration. So we just want to say thank you to all of you for your support. Fall has gotten off to an extremely busy start for us. In the next couple of days, and Wednesday of this week, we'll be in Boston for a breakfast with Congressman Stephen Lynch, and then on Friday we'll be in Portland, Maine for a breakfast with the Congresswoman from the 1st Congressional District in Maine, Shelley Pingree, and then we'll be going to Vermont to have a breakfast with the Congresswoman, Congressperson for the whole state of Vermont, and that is Becca Ballant. We'll be speaking to the New England Council. We'll be back here on October 22nd for a breakfast with the Congressman as Seth Magaziner. So needless to say, it is very, very busy for the New England Council. And October 31st, we'll have an event with Congressman Jim McGovern, who will be speaking on robotics and how important that field is here in New England. So, as always, you can find more information and register for any of these programs or on our website, newenglandcouncil.com. But again, very, very busy. But today we're honored to welcome back Senator Sheldon Whitehouse for his annual address to the New England Council, and for purposes of a very formal introduction of our very special friend. I'm now pleased to hand it over to Kristen Abdel-Aziz, Director of Corporate Communications here at Amica Mutual Insurance.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Jim, for that warm welcome. On behalf of the leadership of Amica, I just want to say thanks for having us today and giving us this opportunity. As Jim said, we've been a proud member of the New England Council for years. We really value the relationships that are formed here, both with policymakers and with our fellow members. On a personal note, I'm going to hope my voice doesn't betray me too badly today. I spent the weekend following my teenage boys around an amusement park, and those upside-down roller coasters hit a little harder than they used to. So I'm dealing with that, lots of screaming. Today I have the distinct honor to introduce Rhode Island's junior Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator Whitehouse was elected to the Senate in 2006 and is currently serving his third term. Over that time, he's been an advocate for many issues that are important to our region. As a senior member of the Senate's Environmental and Public Works Committee, he's been an outspoken voice on environmental protection and climate change. He has championed the offshore wind industry, and he's authored legislation to confront the crisis of plastics and waste in our oceans. As the opioid epidemic has devastated the nation, Senator Whitehouse has worked to advance investments in prevention and treatment, and authored the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, which was the first significant bipartisan law to address the crisis. He's also been a staunch defender of Social Security and Medicare, and has made improving care and the cost of health care a hallmark of his career. We're so honored to have him here today and happy he can join us to discuss his important work, the upcoming election, and the remainder of the 118th Congress. So with that, please join me in welcoming the Honorable United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
He tried to start a standing O here. We see how that went. So it's wonderful to be with all of you. I'll touch on a couple of quick topics, and then we can go to question and answer. One thing you're going to see in the news later today is we're releasing today a report that I've been working on for 6 years now through immense executive branch counterpressure on Justice Kavanaugh's investigation during his confirmation proceedings. And the findings are exactly what you would expect, that they were completely directed by the White House, and that the statements made at the time that the FBI had free rein were false. And they also said, you don't need to worry because the FBI investigation is going to be done completely by the book, was the phrase that was used, following our procedures. What they omitted when they said that is that for a supplemental background investigation, which this was, there is no book. There are no procedures other than do what the White House tells you. So it seemed to me pretty misleading to be told that we were having an investigation that was done by the book when the fact of the matter is there is no book. One of the directions to the FBI was don't look for corroborating evidence. You're only allowed to look for direct evidence, which then led to the argument made in the Senate nonstop, but there's no corroboration. Yeah, there was no corroboration because the FBI was specifically directed not to find any. And the last piece is that there was a tip line that was ultimately set up, and again, they purported to follow tip line procedures. There's a very robust tip line procedure. For this, the tip line procedure was not followed. They took every tip that related to the confirmation of then Judge Kavanaugh and unexamined, uninvestigated, shipped them to the White House. And at the end of the day, 0 tips were ever investigated by the FBI. So it was not their finest hour, and that's one of the reasons it took 6 years to push and push and push and push and push until we had sufficient information to be able to substantiate those conclusions. So that should be out later today. The last time I spoke here, we talked about the insurance problem climate change causes, which, if you have a collapse in the insurance market, cascades into a mortgage market problem because you can't get a mortgage if you don't have insurance. And if you have property and it can't get a mortgage, then it's really hard to sell it. So you have a problem in property values. And the chief economist for Freddie Mac, the giant mortgage company, had testified in my budget committee that this will likely lead to a systemic economic knockdown like the 2008 mortgage meltdown, which our credit union table will remember with shock and horror, from that cascade based on a crash in coastal property values. And what's happened since then is that wildfire-adjacent property values have created the same situation. So it's now a double-edged sword. And when I mentioned that, obviously we've been working on it in the budget committee. But about, 2.5 months ago now maybe, The Economist magazine led with a cover article. If you know The Economist magazine, you know that they have a cover, and then they have a summary of the cover article, and then they have the full in-depth cover article. That was the treatment that this issue got, and they pointed out that the national commercial and residential real estate portfolio, if you will, is about $25 trillion, and they use language like, we can expect the largest asset class in the world to be shaken to its core by what's coming. So we're going to continue to work to try to prevent that. Helene has obviously created a path of just god-awful destruction. Tim was talking about his company's facility in Asheville and how out of 800 employees, they've only been in touch with 400. So we're hoping and praying that the other 400 are simply out of communication and not lost, but we're over 100 lost lives already and climbing. So what we don't see yet is what kind of a blow that is to insurance markets. But obviously they're going to have to adjust for this new level of risk, and at some point the retraction or the property tax increase grows so much that it begins to affect property values. It's already happening in Florida. That day has come. And when I went down to do some politicking for both our Senate candidate and for Vice President Harris, everywhere I mentioned this, you know, you can look out at the room and every head is nodding, or the people are turning to the person next to them to say, yeah, mine just quadrupled, or yeah, I just got put into the state-backed insurer against my will. It was really, it's a huge live issue down there that I hope will resonate in Florida in the election. So we will see. We need Republicans to be willing to take climate change seriously, and we're going to continue to press on that. The good news is that over in Europe, there's going to be a carbon border tariff. They call it the CBAM. EU and UK have both signed up for it. They're going to start tariffing American exports if the carbon footprint is higher here than there, which it is for a lot of these footprints. So that changes the political dynamic, and it puts a lot of American industry on the side of it's actually not in our interest any longer to defend a fossil fuel free to pollute model. It's actually good for us because we can get out of the tariff if there is a price on carbon, which is what economists will say there should be. So we're going to turn into all of that, but obviously the election is going to determine our outcome. We're basically down to 12 remaining pathways to climate safety that have been predicted in economic scenarios out of 1,200 that were reviewed in the study that looked at them all. So 99% of our options are now gone because we've fiddled and dawdled on this for so long. The 12 that remain all require a price on carbon, otherwise we fail. And they also require direct air capture because they all overshoot 1.5 degrees, which means you've got to claw your way back, which means you've got to extract carbon from the sky. You can't just stop it in the smokestacks any longer. So that's the path we have to follow, and I'm determined, whether I'm the budget chairman or the Environment Public Works chairman next year, to make sure that we do that. What I hope is that we win the trifecta, even if it's close, that we win, that we move immediately into a reconciliation bill, which is the kind of bill that has to relate to finance, but can pass with only 50 votes. It's unfilibusterable. And then while we're passing that bill, which will have, the child tax credit, carbon price, restoration of fairness in the tax code, a whole variety of work there, we're also figuring out how we get around the filibuster and getting agreement on that so that we can then do a second big bill that has reproductive rights, voting rights, ethics for the Supreme Court, and things like that, and then just run that through probably by changing the quorum call rules. That's really the key here. It's not the filibuster. I'd love to have them filibuster for 2 months on those subjects. Go for it. We'll happy to burn that time. So that's sort of what the general plan is, should we get lucky and win the trifecta. Otherwise, I don't really know what to say, but look out. I'll mention one last thing. We're working with the McKee administration. Tony Afonso is here from the McKee administration, and a bunch of the healthcare actors to try to push through a program that the state is applying for called the AHEAD program, which is a new way of compensation. As you know, Rhode Island hospitals and Rhode Island doctors have been paid less than Massachusetts hospitals and doctors and Connecticut hospitals and doctors for a very, very long time. And fixing that is really, really important because we all see how damaging the underpayment is to our healthcare system, that it's much better for people to go work in Massachusetts or Connecticut. People go find procedures. They have more money to invest, to put into their facilities, all of that. So we've got to put an end to that, and the AHEAD program gives us the first opportunity we've had to put an end to that. It's not going to cover everybody, only the participants, but it's the thin edge of the wedge, and it means as we move more and more to value-based care, the model for Rhode Island will be set at a competitive regional price for us, not in the payment hole that we've lived in for decades. So the whole delegation is working on that. The McKee administration is working on that. We have the Hospital Association and others working on that. If we could solve that problem, that would be a really good thing. And so highly local stuff, but I'm sick to death of having our hospitals paid 10 or 15% less than hospitals right across the border. It just is wrong, and it's been a long battle, and this is, I hope it's successful conclusion. So with that, I'm happy to talk about any old thing you'd like to talk about, and Jim, you got to...
I have a couple of questions, and it gives you time to think of your own questions to ask. So let me just begin. Senator, you already indicated that you're willing to kill the filibuster.
Work around it.
Yeah. For protection of abortion rights.
Yep.
Vice President indicated she's in favor of changing the filibuster rule. To do the John Lewis voting rights
Yep.
bill you
Yep.
want to do.
Yep, which includes getting rid of dark money.
Right, and to restructure the Supreme Court.
Yep.
So those are three. Basically, though, aren't we just abolishing, for all practical purposes, the filibuster, and we're going to become more like, as somebody said, the House on steroids?
Yeah. If you abolished the filibuster, we would, but the rules change that I think we would go towards actually changes the quorum call rule. You got to be a real procedure nerd to care about any of this, but it has a huge impact. What happens right now is that a bill comes up, and if the Republicans want to oppose it, in the old days, they'd stand up and they would speak, and you'd have a talking filibuster, and when they were all done talking, particularly if they'd all talked twice, then any further debate would be deemed dilatory, and the majority party would get to call the question. And when you call the question by a simple majority. The problem is that in that time when they have this chance to debate, they can put the Senate into quorum calls. And it takes one senator in the minority party to put the Senate into a quorum call. I've done it. You stand up and you say, I note the absence of a quorum. Done. You're now in a quorum call. The only two ways to get out of the quorum call are to ask unanimous consent to get out of the quorum call, which we do all the time, or produce a quorum of 50 senators. So if they're not going to give unanimous consent, we're now stuck, and on any given day, Senator X stands up and says, I note the absence of quorum, ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated, no objection. Okay, now we got to go find 50 senators and produce them on the Senate floor, and now we have a quorum. And you can go to the next order of business, and then somebody stands up, Senator Y stands up and says, I note the absence of a quorum. And over and over and over you go, and particularly everybody else goes home, right? 46 members of the minority party go home, and 3 stay on the floor to note the absence of a quorum and keep throwing us into having to produce, 50 or 51 senators. And that's why there's so much dead time on the Senate floor also. So what we do is say, okay, when you're in this rule, you can talk as long as you want. You can filibuster as long as you want. We're going to use the old Senate rules. But at some point, you're going to be done talking. And when you're done talking, we call the question. And we actually had that happen recently on the Ukraine funding. They talked way, way, way into the night. I stayed there just because I was very interested in, helping Ukraine. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting on the floor next to Patty Murray, who was the floor manager for the bill. And Mike Lee spoke for about an hour. And when he was done talking, Patty Murray popped up and said, if there's no further debate, I call the question. Boom, done. And there was no further debate. There was nobody waiting in the cloakroom to come out. And we passed that with a simple majority. So it actually is a way to kind of revive the real filibuster. It's not something you're going to want to use regularly like the House and ram stuff through, because you're probably giving up a month of Senate floor time to allow that actual filibuster to take place. So it would be used quite rarely and only for very important things, but I prefer that to being jammed up and having a minority veto on anything that their big donors don't like. Particularly one that's so easy to defend. One person, can bollocks everything up. They don't even have to do any work.
You're one of the leaders to restructure the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
There were many members saying that we ought to have a term limit. There are other people saying there should be an age limit. Some people saying we should expand the Supreme Court. You're one of the leaders of a ethics legislation for the judicial branch. Your thoughts on how far along this is going to go?
I'm supporting my 2 bills. One is an ethics reform that actually requires the court to set up its own proper rules. And more importantly, it's one thing to have rules. It's another thing to have some way to make factual determinations about what actually took place, and then measure those factual determinations against those rules, and then reach a conclusion. And none of that exists at the Supreme Court. The 9 members of the Supreme Court are the only people in all of government in all of the United States for whom there is no fact-finding when an allegation of misconduct is made. They either ignore it, or they make up their own false facts and just say it to the public, or have an intermediary say it, and then go on as if nothing. There's never even a proper investigation. And I think that has to be fixed. There are ways to do it. 50 states have Supreme Courts, all of which have the same issue of a topmost Supreme Court that has to subject itself in some fashion to some form of investigation and discipline. Every single one of the 50 states has solved it. So this is not even hard, but they're willfully refusing to go along. So we're going to press them on that. My other bill is the term limits, which puts the court under an 18-year term limit. It's retroactive, so do the math. Some of them are going to be moving out very quickly on the rotating schedule for replacement that the law would create. And what would happen to them is something very familiar to lawyers. They go to senior status. And they wait over at the Supreme Court on senior status for the constitutional cases, what the Constitution calls original jurisdiction cases, that you can make a constitutional argument when they were appointed, way back when, they achieved the right to make the decisions on the cases that the Constitution gave to the court. But on the regular appellate cases, which may involve the Constitution, may involve just the laws, that Congress gave to the court, and Congress can take it away and move that around, shift it. So what you do is you take the senior ones, put them on senior status, just like Will Smith is on senior status right now here in Rhode Island, and they would stick around, and they would handle original jurisdiction cases whenever they come up, and their replacements would handle the appellate work, which is the bulk, 95, 99% of the court's work. So I think it meets constitutional muster, and it undoes the damage that has been done to the court, both by the big, powerful political forces that have created this problem, and by the justices themselves, who have not been responsible about cleaning up their own mess.
Would you be in favor of expanding the number of Supreme Court justices from 19 to whatever, 15?
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I'd prefer go the term limits route. It's extremely popular. It makes a lot of sense. It models most courts in the country and most around the world, so it's a very familiar model. And you don't walk into the court packing argument and the whole FDR history of that I think creates a lot of potential political headwinds. And I'd rather do this with less political headwinds.
Last count, I think you've given 287 speeches on the United States Senate floor on the
Climate mess.
climate change.
Yeah, a lot of good it did.
But now you have a big megaphone being the chair of the Budget Committee.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how climate change affects the federal budget?
Sure. What we've been looking at is how climate change is going to push into the economy. Not polar bears, not beach houses, but the economy. And the platform for this is that if you look at our federal debt, a third of it comes not from piling up deficits, but from sudden economic shocks to the economy that leave these huge dents, these huge debts that we have to handle. COVID was one, and the 2008 mortgage meltdown was the other. And we have very compelling expert testimony from analysts like the leading people in the Macmillan Insurance Consulting firm, the top risk person, former top risk person for Goldman Sachs. I mean, the American CEO of the Aon company. We're going to really serious individuals who have fiduciary responsibilities to get this right. And they are saying that the next big shock is going to come from climate change. And one way that it could come is the insurance crisis that turns into the mortgage crisis, that turns into the property values crisis, that becomes system-wide. And that's very widely reported on. And as I mentioned, go look up The Economist magazine. That could be a global problem. The other that is discussed a lot is called the carbon bubble. And that is what happens when there's a sudden shift in appreciation of the harm of fossil fuel emissions, or a sudden either relentment or loss of political power by the fossil fuel industry, so they can't keep jamming their product forward, and the resistance begins to win, and then there's a very sudden shift. And there's a lot of fossil fuel industry asset base that becomes useless. And so the value of those properties drops to zero or goes negative. The value of the fossil fuel companies that owns them drops significantly. And like anything that happens very suddenly, it creates an economic shock. And in the same way that it wasn't just bad mortgages that suffered in 2008 and thereafter, the shock in the fossil fuel industry, the carbon bubble bursting, then flows out. And that could happen really any time that the cartel, OPEC, decides to head for the exits. When Saudi Arabia and these big producers decide, okay, game's over, let's sell as much as we can at margin plus 1 penny and just get out of this business and, fire sale from them, we cannot meet their price. So our value for our national fossil fuel goes essentially to zero, except for like natural gas that's being piped to customers and doesn't have to go through the market. So there are a whole bunch of different ways in which this collapses. And it's eating away at our economy already. If you look at what's happening to agricultural prices from droughts and flooding, if you look at what's happening to shipping prices from the Panama Canal being jammed up with low water that ships can't get through, if you're looking at insurance prices already, huge part of the inflation. So you can't screw up the world massively and not have it affect the economy, is what it turns out. And these are some of the different vectors that we've had extremely compelling testimony about.
The federal debt is now exceeding $35 trillion in the U.S. The Budget Committee, Congressional Budget Office, released a report recently, and it said in 10 years we could be at $56 trillion in debt. Right now, the second largest expenditure in the federal budget is paying the interest on the debt. Do you think you and your colleagues will ever come to an agreement on how to address the ever-increasing debt?
I hope so. I think my strategy for this basically has 4 components. One is head off the climate shock, because we don't need another. We've got $10 trillion in shock cost in that 30 trillion. So we don't need another 10 trillion added to that because of a shock. So let's solve that. Mm-hmm. Second thing, let's solve the problem of very big corporations and very big income earners not paying taxes. I call that decorrupting the tax code. You can raise a lot of money doing that. And then the other big loose piece is healthcare expense, which is a huge part of that, of our deficit. And we figured out how to solve the health problem with the transition to value-based care. The Rhode Island Foundation is doing a lot of good work to support that transition here in Rhode Island. Some of our local providers like Coastal and Integra were complete leaders as we moved in that first step through what they called ACOs. So at the moment, the U.S. is sort of between 1.5 and 2 times the average cost per capita of our really developed OECD competitors and fellow nations in terms of per capita healthcare cost. There's no reason that we should be that much more. Our results in terms of things like life expectancy, we are at the very bottom of that group. We're equivalent to Croatia. So there's this huge opportunity in healthcare where we spend so much money for such bad results by fixing the system itself in ways that actually help patients get the care. And the ACO model is working on that. The AHEAD model will move that further forward. And the simplest way that I've had to describe that is from our neighborhood health plan folks. Mm-hmm. When Peter Marino got in, he said to his team, find me the 50 biggest emergency department spends that we have. And let's take a look at all of them. And sometimes it's just some cataclysmic thing that happens, so there's a terribly big expense. But a lot of times it's frequent flyers who are showing up in the emergency department over and over and over again. One of the social workers came back and said, Peter, this is going to sound weird, but I think if we buy this guy an air conditioner and a TV, we can keep him out of our emergency room. I think he's coming in mostly because he's hot and lonely. Well, you could never make TVs and air conditioners a benefit. But if you're thinking in those terms, they spent, I don't know, $800 on the TV and on the air conditioner, and sure enough, the guy went from a $300,000 a year emergency department spend to a $30,000 a year emergency department spend. They saved about $250,000 on the guy by meeting him where he was and seeing what he really needed. And that's a kind of extreme version, but there are lots of ways in which when your doctors are thinking about how to keep you safe, how to keep you healthy, how to keep you well, how to keep you out of the hospital, how to head off disease and head off injury, then the world changes and we start to shed those costs. Mm-hmm. And if nobody believes we can do it, look what we did with our workers' compensation system, 30 years ago? We went from the most expensive in the country to one of the least expensive in the country, a national model, and we did it virtually overnight. And in 10 years, half of the cost went out of the system, and it did so without hurting workers. We just made the system work better. Mm-hmm. So we can do that in healthcare, and that ought to be a really good bipartisan priority.
Mm. You and your committee held a hearing recently on the solvency of Social Security.
Yeah.
And in 11 years, if we do nothing, we will have 20% less benefits being sent out to our recipients. Any discussion? I know you've talked to your chair of the finance, Senator Wyden, about maybe restructuring the tax code to get additional revenue in, but your thoughts on how we're going to avoid the 20% reduction in benefits?
There are about maybe 4 or 5 different bills in the Senate that would solve that problem. One of them is mine. They're quite similar, and the Biden administration has talked about fixing this problem. I think the vice president will be keen to solve the problem. You saw that wonderful moment when everybody in the State of the Union speech stood up and gave a rousing bipartisan standing ovation to Joe Biden saying, okay, so no benefit cuts? No benefit cuts to Social Security? No benefit cuts to Medicare? We're unanimous on that now? So benefit cuts, I think, should be off the table, which means you've got to raise revenues, and you can, because at the moment, contributions to Medicare and Social Security cap out at $167,000 of income, and after that, and there are lots of people who make a lot more than that, you simply don't pay in any longer. You ride for free on the backs of everybody making under $167,000. So I think we can solve that. We bake in the Biden promise, not under 400,000, so we don't start at 167. We leave the window between 167 and 400 open to honor President Biden's promise. But after that, also, when you make a lot of money, you can figure out ways to direct it to yourself around regular salary, where Social Security and Medicare kick in, and we close those loopholes. So however you decide to direct your income to yourself, you pay into Social Security and Medicare on it. And then you can have this beautiful moment when you go to people who are 35 years old right now and have their list of worries and say to them, this worry that Social Security and Medicare won't be there for you, done, off your list. Now go worry about other things. But that we've solved.
You know,
Thank you, AARP, by the way.
President Zelensky was in Washington last week, and he's meeting with members of the Senate and Congress and the President, but he's really looking for assistance on the long-term, the long-range missiles to be allowed to be used in Russia-occupied land in Ukraine, but for military sites only. And the White House is resistant to give him the green light. Your thoughts on how we should go ahead?
I wanted them to have Javelins before we gave them Javelins. I wanted to have them have Bradleys before we gave them Bradleys. I wanted to have them have Abrams before we gave them Abrams. I want to have them have HIMARS and ATACMS and long-range ATACMS. I've been a constant nag on the Biden administration to get them this stuff. And they got all of it. Even the F-16s are starting to fly now. But it's always been
late,
like 6 months or whatever late. And I think had we picked up the pace, they'd be in a much better position now. So I support that. I think it was a dumb tactical mistake to announce publicly that we were not going to allow them to use them long range, because then it became our decision to use them long range. That should have been a private conversation, and then it'd be on them to do it. But I think the Ukrainians have been very adept and very sensible about limiting their attacks on Russian soil to facilities and infrastructure that are directly supporting the attack in and on Ukraine. It's the military air bases, it's the fuel depots, it's the ammunition depots, and they've done a very responsible job about that. They are not bombing children's hospitals like the Russians do and trying to intimidate the population. So I have quite a lot of confidence in Zelensky and in the Ukrainians' willingness to make humane decisions, even in the brutality of the war that's being forced on them. I'll also add that it's my bill that allows us to seize Russian assets, the sovereign assets, and transfer them to Ukraine. And the first dollars are starting to flow through that, and the EU has changed its position, and they're starting to figure out how to push money through. And so they're going to end up with hundreds of billions of dollars for defense and for rebuilding as a result of that legislation, and I'm very happy about that. That was extremely bipartisan with Jim Risch, the ranking member of Foreign Relations.
That's like
nobody liked that bill when we first filed it, and then everybody liked it.
It's like $50 billion, I think, set aside, isn't it?
$50 billion is what's been set aside so far.
Right. What's happening in the Middle East? We've gone from the Gaza situation is now spread to Lebanon, and how concerned are you about it, and what role do you think we should be playing that we're not playing right now?
Well, I'm strongly pro-Israel, so let me just make that clear from the very beginning. That does not necessarily make me strongly pro-Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu has been a menace and has made a lot of dangerous decisions. To me, the goal here is the peace framework that is in the offing, that has been negotiated, the conversations have been going on for years now, in which Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi, UAE, basically the Sunni states around Israel would agree to peace terms with Israel and economic trading terms with Israel. And then with that done, you have now Arab money and Arab forces that can come into Gaza and rebuild and restore peace and, keep public order. And I think that is still the goal we need to fight towards. Two people hate that goal. One is Netanyahu, because it does bring peace, and when there's peace, he's not a wartime prime minister, and the law enforcement folks come after him and his spouse. And the second is the supreme leader in Iran, who now faces a Sunni opposition with Israel and the United States to their Shia regime, and that's a very dangerous situation for them. So they're very eager to destroy in every way that they can the settlement of that peace framework. So defeating them in their abilities to disrupt it, trying to make sure we land that peace framework plane safely, and I don't care, frankly, if that means giving Netanyahu a pass and sending him to the Riviera with, $100 million and, pardons and for all of his mischief, whatever it takes. But we're so close to that, and the Biden administration has been trying so hard for that, and I think Netanyahu's been trying to disrupt that by using his military in ways that are so provocative that he's trying to drive those Arab countries away from the peace framework and making it intolerable to be engaged with Israel.
How concerned are you that AI is going to play in the presidential campaign?
Well, it's already out there, and I think the ability to make fake images of people that are very convincing, faking their voice, faking their image, so that now you're seeing Kamala Harris, God knows what they'll come up with, particularly if it's happening in the last week or so, when it's hard to rebut and respond, and the image gets blasted out through these big platforms. I think Elon Musk would love to have Twitter blasting out that nonsense. He's made his decision clear as to who he wants to win. So, yeah, I think AI is a huge danger in my political space. Bad enough that there's dark money. Now you have like imaginary versions of yourself out there doing things that you never did, but are tough to explain.
And then final question, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer made a bold prediction. He said not only will we keep the Senate, but we're going to expand on the Senate. Do you agree with that?
We can. I don't want to say I agree with it because that takes the impulsion away from what we have to do in the next month. But I'll tell you, I'll close out with this story. I went down on this trip to Florida. I was there 3 days, 1 day in each media market, with a Democratic meeting, with a insurance crisis meeting, and other stuff. But we had those. And the second day, I went to the Villages, which is that big elderly development down there that was famous, notorious even, for everybody driving around in their golf carts flying Trump banners. And Doug Emhoff came down to speak, and they packed the venue. They had to have an overflow room that they also packed. And these were not people coming in off the golf course wearing their golf clothes and curious. This was the entertainment of the afternoon. These were people with their Harris Waltz T-shirts on, with their signs out. This was a demonstration of enthusiasm, and they lit the place up. Emhoff was fabulous. It was a really exciting scene. And then when it was over and the doors opened, everybody poured out of the venue. Across the road was the Trump counter-demonstration, which was 6 people sitting in folding chairs with drooping Trump flags and banners, not even like chanting or ringing bells or honking horns or being annoying in any way, just sitting there limply. And the contrast between the hundreds and hundreds of people pouring out of the venue, full of enthusiasm, carrying their signs, all of that, I asked one of the people who'd helped set this up, what the hell happened? And she said, well, we've actually always been here, but we didn't know of each other, and the Trump people were so boisterous that nobody really wanted to engage with them. So we just kind of went into hiding. But when Harris became the nominee and we started to feel this excitement and we started finding each other, it's like all the little meerkats came up out of their little burrows and saw other little meerkats and realized, damn, we're a thing. And that's not only happening in the villages where it was a complete reversal of energy, but it's happening everywhere I went. Somebody put a yard sign up in their yard, and nobody ran it down, so I'm going to put my yard sign up. And then the next thing, there were 7 yard signs on our street. So there's a really good energy happening in Florida, and the abortion referendum is on the ballot, and they're starting to talk about property insurance as a problem that the Republicans need to own. So I think we can win in Florida, and it will do my soul and my life good if I don't have to face across the Judiciary Committee room any longer and look at Ted Cruz. So if Colin Allred wins, I'll be the happiest senator there is.
Well,
Baylor University football star, evangelical, black, wins in a purple district, went to the NFL, very popular, virtually tied, starting to show some wins in Texas in polling over Ted Cruz, and he has name recognition that is maybe 30 points behind Cruz, so he has what in the business we call gainers, people who can still learn about him and come onto his team, whereas everybody's got their mind settled about Cruz. Do a word cloud in Texas on Cruz, number one word that comes back?
Cancun.
Bingo, Cancun. So I think we can win Florida and Texas, but it's going to take a real push at the end.
Senator, the villages are known more for not just driving around on golf carts, known for other things there too. But I just read about the villages. A question.
There was no sign of any of that when I was there.
One question or 2 questions for the senator, and he's got to leave. But I think we covered a pretty good list of topics. But if there's an issue that we've not covered that you'd like to ask the senator, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
AARP.
Senator, 2 questions. The first one you already answered. I think the reason
Hey.
why we're talking about the impact of climate change.
Yeah.
and the insurance industry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My question is the comments about the healthcare industry and thinking about food as medicine
Yeah.
efforts. And if you have any insights or thoughts about policy and the roadmap to reduce chronic illnesses, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease.
Yeah. The question is, how can treating food as part of a health plan for an individual who's suffering from an illness or is headed towards it be brought more into the equation? In a fee-for-service payment model, it's very hard to get any recovery from Medicare or CMS for that kind of stuff. You may get paid for the visit where the person has to come in and meet with you as the doctor, and you can say to them, now you need to improve your diet. We know how well that works. But in terms of actually having a program, which sometimes could include providing them some types of foods that will get them started, thinking, oh yeah, this I can do this. This is good. This is better for my health. Those things aren't payable. And if you're a Rhode Island doctor and you're barely making it because you're getting paid less than your doctors in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and you're trying to meet 17 people a day to try to keep the churn going on fee-for-service, you don't have the time, you don't have the inclination, and there's no way to get reimbursed for that effort. When you move over into, okay, I've got 10,000 patients, and they have this health profile, and for that, I'm going to get paid this many millions of dollars, and any savings that I get, I can keep or plow back into the practice for better care to keep my patients happier. It's a whole different world. And in that world, it becomes in the doctor's interest to have a nutritionist on the staff to help with that stuff, because now it makes sense. So this is all part of what I think shifts in the right direction when you get off of fee-for-service and into a value-based care model. And that's the kind of stuff that Coastal and Integra did. They brought in nutritionists, they brought in social workers, they brought in their own pharmacists to check on people who had too many, perhaps even conflicting prescriptions from different specialists, all of that. And you saw costs go down, you saw satisfaction go up, you saw health outcomes improve. So more of that is where I want to go.
Okay.
It worked. Let's do more of it.
Well, we only have time for one more question. The dean of the law school, the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, Sam?
Yes, Dean. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really cool about where we are right now is that that is not a thing for Kamala Harris. Yes, she will be the first woman president. Yes, she'll be the first woman of color president. But that's not how or why she's running. She's running on the issues like any other candidate out there to win. And that's a real sea change. It's no longer like with Shirley Chisholm, it was like, wow, somebody tried to do that, but nobody ever thought she had a shot. It was a sort of demonstrative thing. And then Hillary walked into the wall of 2 decades of Republican hostility, antagonism, all that attack on her, so she was in a very tough shape. I think she would have won if Jim Comey hadn't broken FBI rules to meddle in that race to try to make himself look good. So we could be over this, but I really like that we're in a place in this country where that is not her thing. She's running just like anybody else on policy platforms and on integrity and on personal characteristics. It will happen, I hope, and then that will be a wonderful thing. But I love we're in a place where that doesn't have to be the thing about her race. Knock wood. Knock wood.
Can I just ask one quick question? Secret Service, they're under the pressure right now because they've made some major gaffes, needless to say, in the 2 attempted assassinations of the president. Do you think that maybe this is the time that both parties can come together and maybe make a major recommendation? Secret Service should be taken out of Homeland Security and
I have been recommending that for years. I would love to see that happen. I think they should go back to Treasury. Right. I think Homeland Security is an unwieldy mess of a department, and things like this happen when you have an unwieldy mess of a department.
Okay, great. We want to thank the Senator.
Thank you all very much. Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you.